The soft patter of rain drummed against the glass windows of the upscale gallery, casting shimmering reflections of the bustling city street outside. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and faint traces of expensive wine from an earlier event. The gallery was the epitome of exclusivity, a place where only the wealthiest clientele dared to tread, their designer shoes clicking on the pristine marble floor as they admired abstract works with price tags higher than most mortgages. Malcolm Carter stood at the entrance, clutching a large, worn portfolio tightly to his chest. His clothes were simple and functional, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and flowing dresses of the gallery's patrons. His heart pounded as he took in the opulent surroundings. For years, he had dreamed of displaying his work in a space like this. It wasn't just the prestige, it was the opportunity to have his art appreciated on a grand scale, to share his vision with the world. Taking a deep breath, Malcolm stepped inside, his shoes squeaking faintly on the immaculate floor. He was met almost immediately by the sharp gaze of Richard Langston, the gallery's owner. Richard was the kind of man who oozed entitlement, with slicked-back silver hair and a perpetual smirk that hinted at disdain for anything or anyone he deemed unworthy. "Can I help you?" Richard asked, his voice dripping with condescension. His eyes flicked to Malcolm's modest clothing and the fraying edges of his portfolio, and his smirk deepened. "Yes, I hope so," Malcolm replied, forcing a polite smile. "I'm an artist, and I was hoping to speak with someone about displaying my work here." Richard raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms, clearly unimpressed. "You're an artist, are you?" he said, the words laced with skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't," Malcolm admitted, "but I thought." Richard cut him off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Let me stop you right there. This gallery caters to a very specific clientele. We showcase the finest, most sought-after works of art. Unless you're already established or have connections in the industry, I'm afraid you're wasting your time." Malcolm's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but he stood his ground. "I understand this gallery has high standards, but I believe my work speaks for itself. If you just take a look." Richard's smirk turned into a cold chuckle. "Look, I admire your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic. Artists like you," he paused, his eyes briefly scanning Malcolm from head to toe, before continuing, "don't exactly fit the profile of what our clients are looking for. I mean, it's not just about the art. It's about the name, the image, the brand. And frankly, no one's heard of you." The words hit Malcolm like a punch to the gut. He had faced rejection before, countless times, in fact, but something about Richard's tone, the sheer arrogance and lack of basic respect, made this encounter sting more than usual. Still, he refused to let Richard see him falter. "All I'm asking for is a chance," Malcolm said, his voice steady, despite the lump forming in his throat. "I've poured my heart and soul into my work. If you just look at it." Richard sighed theatrically and glanced at his watch. "Fine. 5 minutes. But don't expect miracles." Malcolm set his portfolio on a nearby table and carefully unzipped it, revealing a collection of vibrant, intricate paintings that seemed to pulse with life. Each piece told a story of struggle, resilience, and beauty found in unexpected places. His use of color was bold and unconventional, drawing the eye and evoking powerful emotions. Richard took one look at the first painting and let out a derisive snort. "Interesting," he said, though his tone suggested the opposite. "But not exactly what we're looking for. It's too raw. Unpolished. And frankly, it's not what sells." Malcolm's chest tightened, but he kept his composure. "Art isn't just about what sells," he said quietly. "It's about connection. Expression. Telling a story." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "Spare me the lecture, Mr. Carter. At the end of the day, art is a business. And this?" He gestured vaguely at Malcolm's work. "This isn't business material. My advice? Stick to local street fairs. You might find someone who appreciates whatever it is you're trying to do." With that, Richard turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Malcolm standing there, stunned and humiliated. The other patrons in the gallery barely spared him a glance, their conversations and laughter continuing as if he didn't exist. Malcolm slowly packed up his portfolio, his hands trembling. He could feel the sting of unshed tears, but he refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. As he stepped back out into the rain, the cold drops mingling with the heat of his frustration, Malcolm made a silent vow to himself. He would prove Richard wrong. He would prove them all wrong. They might not see his worth now, but one day, they would. And when that day came, they wouldn't just see him as an artist. They'd see him as a force to be reckoned with. The rain had stopped by the time Malcolm arrived back at his small studio apartment, though the sky outside remained a dull gray. He dropped his soaked bag by the door and sank onto his worn-out couch, staring at the blank canvas on the easel in front of him. The room smelled of turpentine and acrylic paint, with stacks of finished and half-finished pieces leaning against every wall. It wasn't much, but this space was his sanctuary. Malcolm's mind replayed the encounter at the gallery over and over, each dismissive word from Richard cutting deeper every time. Artists like you. The phrase echoed in his head, laden with prejudice and judgment. But despite the frustration, Malcolm refused to let it crush him. He had come too far to give up now. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood in the heart of Atlanta. He had grown up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, but the sense of community had been strong. His mother, a single parent, worked tirelessly as a nurse, often pulling double shifts to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She had always encouraged Malcolm's creativity, even when resources were limited. He remembered one Christmas when money was tight, and instead of toys, his mother had given him a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils from the dollar store. At first, he had been disappointed. But as he began to fill the pages with doodles and shapes, something inside him awakened. Art became his escape, a way to make sense of the world around him. In high school, his art teacher, Mrs. Landry, had been the first to recognize his talent. Malcolm, she had said one afternoon as she examined one of his paintings, you see the world differently. You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone take that from you. Her words had stayed with him, even through the hardest times. But talent alone hadn't been enough to shield him from the harsh realities of life. After graduating, Malcolm had struggled to find a foothold in the art world. Without the right connections or formal training, doors were often slammed in his face. He worked odd jobs to pay the bills, bartending, delivering packages, even cleaning offices at night, all while pouring every spare moment into his art. His paintings told the story of his journey, vibrant depictions of triumph and struggle, layered with textures that mirrored the complexity of human emotion. He had developed a unique style that blended abstract forms with vivid realism, creating pieces that felt alive. Friends and family often marveled at his work, insisting that he was destined for greatness. But the gatekeepers of the art world didn't seem to agree. Malcolm sighed and leaned forward, running a hand over his face. The rejection at the gallery wasn't new. It wasn't even the harshest he had experienced. But it hurt more because he had allowed himself to hope, just for a moment, that things might be different this time. He glanced at the canvas on the easel. It was still blank, a stark reminder of the creative block that had been plaguing him for weeks. Normally, painting was his therapy, his way of processing everything he couldn't put into words. But lately, the weight of constant rejection had sapped his inspiration. As he stared at the empty canvas, his phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up and saw a text from his best friend, Andre. Andre, yo, saw your post about that gallery. Don't let those clowns get to you. You're better than that. Drinks tonight? My treat. Malcolm smiled faintly. Andre had always been his biggest supporter, hyping him up even when Malcolm felt like giving up. He hesitated for a moment before replying. Malcolm, thanks, man. I'll let you know. Gonna try to paint for a bit. He set the phone down and turned back to the canvas, willing himself to pick up the brush. He thought about the people who believed in him, his mom, Mrs. Landry, Andre. They saw something in him, something he had to remind himself was there. Closing his eyes, Malcolm took a deep breath. He let the memory of his mother's encouragement and Mrs. Landry's praise wash over him, pushing aside the sting of Richard's words. Slowly, he dipped his brush into a swirl of crimson paint and made the first stroke on the canvas. Then another. And another. Before long, the blank space began to transform. The color seemed to pour out of him, chaotic yet intentional, each stroke carrying the weight of his emotions. Reds and blues clashed and blended, forming a turbulent sky that mirrored the storm inside him. Shades of gold and green emerged, symbolizing hope and resilience, breaking through the chaos. Hours passed in a blur as Malcolm lost himself in the rhythm of creation. By the time he stepped back, the sun had set, and the room was bathed in the warm glow of his desk lamp. He studied the finished piece, his heart pounding. It was raw and unfiltered, a perfect reflection of everything he was feeling. And it was beautiful. For the first time in weeks, Malcolm felt a spark of hope. Maybe the gallery had rejected him. Maybe the world wasn't ready to see his vision yet. But he wasn't creating for them. He was creating for himself, for the people who saw his work and felt something shift inside them. The next day, Malcolm decided to take a different approach. He photographed his newest painting and uploaded it to his social media accounts with a simple caption, "For anyone who's ever been told they're not good enough." Within hours, the post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, each one more encouraging than the last. "This is incredible. Where can I buy your work? Your talent is undeniable. Keep going. Art like this deserves to be seen by the world." As Malcolm scrolled through the messages, a small smile tugged at his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. He didn't need Richard Langston's approval. He didn't need the validation of an exclusive gallery. What he needed was to keep creating, to keep telling his story, one painting at a time. And so, with renewed determination, Malcolm made a promise to himself: he wouldn't stop. Not until the world knew his name. It had been 3 weeks since Malcolm had uploaded his painting to social media, and life had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a small ripple of interest from his followers had quickly grown into a wave of attention that Malcolm never could have anticipated. His post had been shared by friends, local artists, and even a few prominent influencers who had stumbled across his work. Each day brought a new flurry of notifications, likes, comments, and direct messages from people across the country. Some asked where they could buy his paintings. Others shared how deeply his art resonated with them, how it made them feel seen and understood. Malcolm read every message, his chest swelling with gratitude. But the most significant moment came one quiet afternoon when his phone buzzed with a notification that made him freeze mid-brushstroke. "Sophia Allen wants to connect with you." Sophia Allen was a name Malcolm knew well. She was one of the most influential art collectors in the country, known for discovering and supporting emerging talent. Her private collection featured pieces from legendary artists, and her recommendations had launched countless careers. Malcolm stared at the notification, his mind racing. Was this real? He accepted the request and, moments later, received a message. "Sophia Allen, Malcolm, your work is extraordinary. I'd like to discuss purchasing some of your pieces. Let me know if you're interested." Malcolm sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity before typing out a response. "Malcolm Carter, thank you so much, Ms. Allen. I'd be honored to discuss this further. Please let me know how we can connect." Sophia responded almost immediately, suggesting a video call later that evening. Malcolm spent the rest of the day trying to calm his nerves, pacing his apartment as he rehearsed what he would say. When the time came, he sat in front of his laptop, his heart pounding. The screen flickered, and Sophia's face appeared. She was an elegant woman in her early 50s, with a warm smile and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Behind her was a wall lined with artwork, each piece more stunning than the last. "Malcolm," she began, her voice smooth and confident. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've been following your work online, and I must say, it's remarkable. Your use of color, the emotional depth, it's unlike anything I've seen in a long time. Thank you, Ms. Allen, Malcolm said, trying to keep his voice steady. That means a lot, coming from someone like you. Please, call me Sophia, she said with a smile. Now, I won't waste your time. I'm interested in purchasing 3 of your paintings, the one you recently posted and 2 others from your online portfolio. I'd also like to introduce your work to a few colleagues of mine. I believe your art has the potential to make a significant impact. Malcolm's breath caught. This was more than he had ever dreamed of. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Sophia said with a chuckle. We'll need to discuss pricing and logistics, but I'm confident we can come to an agreement that works for both of us. Tell me, do you have representation? A gallery or an agent? No, Malcolm admitted. I've been doing everything on my own. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. That's admirable, but it's time to change that. The art world can be challenging to navigate, and you'll need someone in your corner. Let me make a few calls. I know some people who would be more than happy to help you. Over the next few weeks, Sophia became more than a client, she became a mentor. She introduced Malcolm to gallery owners, agents, and collectors, each of whom was eager to see his work. His paintings began to sell at astonishing prices, and demand grew faster than he could keep up. Local media caught wind of his success, and soon Malcolm was featured in articles and interviews. The story of a self-taught artist from humble beginnings resonated with audiences, and his name began to spread beyond the art world. But what meant the most to Malcolm were the moments when people shared how his art had touched them. A single mother wrote to him, saying that his painting of a sunrise reminded her of the resilience she needed to keep going. A young artist told him that seeing his work gave them the courage to pursue their own dreams. Malcolm poured everything he had into his art, creating pieces that spoke to the struggles and triumphs of the human spirit. Each painting told a story, his story, and connected him with people in ways he had never imagined. As his fame grew, Malcolm couldn't help but think back to the gallery where Richard Langston had dismissed him. The memory still stung, but it no longer defined him. He had proven, not just to Richard but to himself, that his work had value. He was no longer chasing validation from gatekeepers. Instead, he was carving his own path. One evening, as Malcolm stood in his studio, putting the finishing touches on a new painting, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophia. Sophia, congratulations, Malcolm. Your latest piece just sold for $250,000. The buyer is ecstatic. Keep up the amazing work. Malcolm stared at the screen, the number almost too surreal to believe. He thought about all the late nights, the rejections, the times he had doubted himself. And now, here he was, his art changing lives, his name becoming synonymous with resilience and brilliance. But even as success enveloped him, Malcolm stayed grounded. He knew there was more work to be done, not just for himself but for other artists like him, those who had talent but lacked opportunity. And as he set down his phone and turned back to his canvas, Malcolm knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind for Malcolm. His career trajectory soared to unimaginable heights, leaving even his closest friends and family in awe. The pieces Sophia had purchased became the cornerstone of a larger narrative, a self-taught artist who had risen from obscurity to capture the hearts of collectors, critics, and everyday admirers. Malcolm's work began appearing in prestigious galleries across the country. His paintings were described as visceral and transformative, with art critics praising his ability to weave raw emotion into every brushstroke. Collectors clamored to own his pieces, and his growing list of high-profile clients included CEOs, celebrities, and even political figures. One evening, Malcolm found himself standing in the middle of a packed gallery in New York City. The exhibition, titled Fragments of Resilience, featured 20 of his most iconic works. The room buzzed with excitement as attendees marveled at the paintings, each one a testament to Malcolm's unique vision. "Mr. Carter, your use of texture is extraordinary," said one guest, a well-known critic. "It's as though you've captured the soul of the human experience on canvas." Malcolm smiled graciously. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." As the night progressed, Malcolm was approached by countless admirers, each eager to share their thoughts on his work. But one moment stood out. A young woman, no older than 20, hesitated near one of his paintings, a sprawling piece that depicted a stormy sea with hints of light breaking through the clouds. "That one's my favorite," Malcolm said, noticing her gaze. She turned, startled. "Oh, I didn't mean to bother you." "You're not bothering me," he assured her. "What do you think of it?" She hesitated before speaking. It's like you painted what I've been feeling. The chaos, the struggle, but also the hope. It's beautiful." Her words hit Malcolm harder than she realized. Moments like this reminded him why he painted, not for the fame or the fortune, but for the connection his art could create. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm glad it resonates with you." As Malcolm's reputation grew, so did his bank account. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to worry about making rent or choosing between groceries and art supplies. He moved into a spacious studio with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the room with natural light. The walls were lined with his works in progress, and a long wooden table held an array of paints, brushes, and tools. But Malcolm remained grounded, remembering the struggles that had shaped him. He made it a point to give back to his community, donating a portion of his earnings to programs that supported young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. He also began mentoring aspiring creators, offering them the guidance he had once lacked. One of those ments was a teenage boy named Jalen, who reminded Malcolm of himself at that age, quiet, talented, and full of potential. Jalen had come to one of Malcolm's workshops, clutching a portfolio of sketches. The drawings were rough, but brimming with raw emotion. "You've got something special, Jalen," Malcolm told him. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Under Malcolm's guidance, Jalen's confidence grew, and his work began to shine. Seeing Jalen's progress filled Malcolm with pride, reaffirming his belief that art could be a powerful force for change. Despite his success, Malcolm couldn't shake the memory of Richard Langston, the gallery owner who had mocked him. The humiliation he had felt that day still lingered, though it had long since been overshadowed by his triumphs. Part of him wanted to confront Richard, to show him just how wrong he had been. But another part of him knew that his success was the best revenge. Then, one day, an opportunity presented itself. Malcolm was scrolling through an email from a real estate agent when he saw it, an offer for a struggling gallery in a prime location downtown. The name of the gallery caught his eye, and his heart skipped a beat. It was Richard Langston's gallery. Malcolm read through the listing with a mixture of shock and amusement. The gallery, once a thriving establishment, had fallen on hard times. Attendance had dwindled, sales had plummeted, and Richard was desperate to sell. Malcolm stared at the screen, his mind racing. This was more than a business opportunity, it was poetic justice. He had the means to buy the gallery, to take the very space where he had been humiliated and transform it into something meaningful. Without hesitation, Malcolm reached out to the agent. "I'm interested in purchasing the gallery," he said. "Let's set up a meeting." A week later, Malcolm walked into the gallery for the first time since that fateful day. It looked smaller than he remembered, and the walls were sparsely decorated with uninspired pieces. The once bustling space now felt cold and lifeless. Richard greeted him at the door, though it was clear he didn't recognize Malcolm. His once pristine suit was slightly rumpled, and there was a nervous energy about him. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming," Richard said, extending a hand. "I've heard a lot about you. Your success is remarkable." Malcolm shook his hand, suppressing a smirk. "Thank you. I'm here to discuss the sale of the gallery." As they sat down to negotiate, Malcolm couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Richard was unaware that the artist he had dismissed was now sitting across from him, ready to buy his failing gallery. But Malcolm kept his composure, knowing that the time for the grand reveal would come later. By the end of the meeting, Malcolm had signed the paperwork. The gallery was his. As he walked out the door, Malcolm glanced back at the space, imagining what it could become. He wasn't just buying a gallery, he was reclaiming his story. And he couldn't wait to see Richard's reaction when he realized the truth. The day had finally arrived. Malcolm was now the proud owner of the very gallery where Richard Langston had humiliated him years ago. While he had every legal document signed and stamped, Richard still had no idea that Malcolm Carter, the same artist he had once mocked, was the man behind the purchase. Malcolm decided to keep his identity a secret for a little longer. He wanted the reveal to have maximum impact, and he needed to transform the space before that moment came. The gallery, which had been a cold, pretentious environment under Richard's management, was about to undergo a stunning metamorphosis. For weeks, Malcolm threw himself into the project. He envisioned a space that would celebrate diversity, creativity, and inclusivity. The gallery would become a haven for artists who had been overlooked by traditional institutions, people like him, who had talent but lacked connections. He brought in a team of architects and designers to renovate the space. The sterile white walls were replaced with warm, inviting colors. A small cafe was added, where visitors could sit and discuss the art over coffee. Interactive installations were introduced, allowing patrons to engage with the pieces in unique ways. Malcolm even set up a dedicated section to showcase the work of local, underrepresented artists, ensuring that the gallery would be a platform for new talent. The name of the gallery was also changed. It was no longer Langston's Fine Art Gallery. Malcolm rechristened it as the Phoenix Collective, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. Meanwhile, Richard Langston had moved on from the gallery's sale, still oblivious to the buyer's identity. He had assumed that the new owner would fail, given the declining state of the business. It never crossed his mind that the buyer might be someone he had crossed in the past. But as renovations progressed, rumors began to circulate in the art world. Whispers of Malcolm Carter's involvement reached Richard, though they were vague and unconfirmed. Richard dismissed them at first, but curiosity soon got the better of him. He started keeping tabs on the gallery's progress, and when the grand reopening was announced, he decided he had to attend. The day of the reopening was nothing short of spectacular. The gallery was buzzing with energy, packed with artists, collectors, and media representatives. Malcolm had invited everyone who had supported him on his journey, as well as some of the most influential figures in the art world. As the evening began, Malcolm stood in the center of the gallery, greeting guests and accepting congratulations. He was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, exuding the quiet confidence of someone who had earned their success. And then, Richard walked in. Malcolm noticed him immediately. Richard looked around the transformed space with a mixture of awe and confusion. He clearly didn't recognize Malcolm yet, and the irony wasn't lost on him. Here was the man who had once belittled his talent, now standing in a gallery that Malcolm had built from the ground up. Richard approached one of the staff members, a young woman who was handing out brochures. "Excuse me," he said. "Who owns the gallery now? I've been hearing a lot of buzz about the new management." The woman smiled. "Oh, that would be Mr. Malcolm Carter. He's actually here tonight. Would you like me to introduce you?" Richard froze. The name hit him like a freight train. He stammered, "Malcolm Carter? As in, the artist?" "Yes," she said cheerfully. "He's incredible, isn't he? His vision has completely revitalized this place." Before Richard could respond, Malcolm approached, a calm smile on his face. "Richard," he said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." Richard turned to him, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Malcolm, you?" "I'm the new owner," Malcolm said simply. "Welcome to the Phoenix Collective." For a moment, Richard was speechless. He looked around the gallery, taking in the crowd, the art, the success of it all. And then his gaze returned to Malcolm, who stood tall and composed, radiating the quiet strength of someone who had nothing to prove. I had no idea," Richard stammered. This is incredible. Thank you, Malcolm said, his tone polite but firm. It's taken a lot of hard work and perseverance to get here. But I wanted to create a space where every artist could feel valued, something I didn't feel when I first walked through those doors. Richard's face reddened. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Malcolm held up a hand to stop him. There's no need for apologies, Malcolm said. What happened that day taught me an important lesson, that my worth isn't determined by the opinions of others. It's determined by my belief in myself and the work I create. Richard nodded, clearly uncomfortable but unable to argue. Well, he said awkwardly, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you, Malcolm replied. I don't need luck, though. I've got determination, talent, and a great team. That's all I'll ever need. As the evening wore on, Malcolm mingled with his guests, leaving Richard to fade into the background. The event was a resounding success, with multiple pieces sold and media outlets praising the gallery's transformation. But for Malcolm, the highlight of the night wasn't the sales or the praise, it was the knowledge that he had reclaimed his story. The gallery that had once been a symbol of rejection and exclusion was now a beacon of hope and opportunity. And as he stood in the middle of the bustling space, surrounded by art and laughter, Malcolm felt a deep sense of peace. He had turned his pain into power, his rejection into redemption. And this was only the beginning. The success of the Phoenix Collective was undeniable. Within weeks of the grand reopening, the gallery had become the talk of the art world. Visitors flocked to see the unique exhibits and experience the inclusive, vibrant energy that Malcolm had cultivated. Media outlets ran glowing features, and Malcolm's vision was heralded as revolutionary. Yet, despite all the attention and praise, there was one event Malcolm had been planning in secret, a special reveal that would forever cement the gallery's new identity and send a powerful message to the art world. Malcolm announced the event 2 months after the reopening. Invitations were sent to prominent collectors, art critics, media representatives, and most importantly, underrepresented artists who rarely had access to such platforms. The invitation was simple yet intriguing, a night to redefine art, join us for a celebration of talent, perseverance, and change. Among those invited was Richard Langston. Though deeply embarrassed by their last encounter, Richard couldn't resist the invitation. He still clung to a sliver of hope that he could mend bridges, or at least salvage some respectability by attending. What Richard didn't know was that this event wasn't just another gallery exhibition. It was a deliberate act of storytelling, orchestrated by Malcolm, to highlight the journey that had brought him here. The night of the event, the gallery was transformed yet again. The main exhibition hall featured a striking new installation, a timeline of Malcolm's career, told through his art. Each piece represented a chapter of his life, from the humble beginnings of his early work to the bold, confident strokes of his current style. Accompanying each painting was a short description of the circumstances under which it was created, descriptions that painted a vivid picture of Malcolm's struggles, resilience, and triumphs. At the center of the room was the piece that started it all, the painting Malcolm had brought to Richard's gallery years ago. It was displayed prominently, with a plaque beneath it that read, "The Turning Point, Rejected but Never Defeated." Guests wandered through the exhibit, visibly moved by Malcolm's journey. Some wiped away tears as they read the descriptions. Others whispered words of admiration and respect. The atmosphere was electric, filled with a sense of awe and inspiration. As the night progressed, Malcolm took the stage to address the crowd. He stood beneath a spotlight, his presence commanding yet humble. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," Malcolm said, his voice steady and warm. "Thank you for being here tonight. This event is about more than just celebrating art, it's about celebrating the power of resilience, the importance of believing in oneself, and the value of creating spaces where every voice can be heard." He gestured toward the installation. "Each piece in this exhibit represents a moment in my life, a moment of struggle, of hope, of growth. They're not just paintings, they're pieces of my soul. And tonight, I want to share a story that ties it all together." The audience leaned in, captivated. "Several years ago, I walked into this very gallery with a painting I'd poured my heart into, Malcolm continued. I was met with laughter and dismissal. I was told my work wasn't good enough. That moment could have broken me. But instead, it became the fire that fueled my determination. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. Today, I stand here not as the artist who was rejected, but as the owner of this gallery, a gallery that I've transformed into a space of inclusivity, respect, and opportunity. Because no artist should ever be made to feel like their work doesn't matter. The crowd erupted into applause, but Malcolm wasn't finished. And now, he said, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge someone who played an unexpected role in my journey. Richard Langston, would you please join me? All eyes turned to Richard, who sat near the back of the room. His face flushed as he realized there was no way to decline. Slowly, he rose and walked to the stage, his steps hesitant and his posture tense. Malcolm extended a hand to Richard as he joined him on stage. Richard, he said, his tone measured but firm, when I walked into this gallery all those years ago, I wasn't just looking for validation, I was looking for an opportunity. And while your rejection hurt, it also taught me a valuable lesson, that my worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. The audience watched intently, the tension palpable. I'm not here to shame you, Malcolm continued. I'm here to thank you. Because that moment pushed me to work harder, to believe in myself even when others didn't. And it's because of that belief that we're all standing here tonight. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but Malcolm held up a hand. Let this night serve as a reminder, he said, addressing the crowd once more, that every artist has value, that every voice deserves to be heard, and that rejection is not the end of the story, it's just the beginning of a new chapter. The room erupted into applause once again, the energy electric. Richard stood awkwardly by Malcolm's side, unsure of what to do. But Malcolm simply smiled, shook his hand, and gestured for him to return to his seat. As the event wound down, Malcolm mingled with the guests, many of whom expressed their gratitude and admiration. One young artist approached him with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said. For showing us that it's possible. Malcolm smiled. It's not just possible, it's necessary. And now it's your turn to show the world what you've got. Months passed, and the Phoenix Collective continued to thrive under Malcolm's leadership. The gallery had become a beacon of hope in the art world, attracting artists and visitors from all corners of the globe. But for Malcolm, the true measure of his success wasn't in the accolades or the growing list of sold-out exhibitions. It was in the impact he was making on the lives of others, on the artists who had found a platform to showcase their work, and on the young people who walked through the gallery doors, inspired by what he had built. The space itself had undergone yet another transformation. As the demand for art from diverse voices grew, Malcolm expanded the Phoenix Collective to include mentorship programs, workshops, and even an artist residency. He wanted to give emerging artists not just a space to display their work, but the tools and opportunities to grow. Malcolm's work with local communities became the heartbeat of the gallery. Every month, a different artist was given a solo show, and every exhibition included a public talk or artist Q&A, where visitors could engage directly with the creators. He also introduced an outreach program aimed at bringing art to underserved schools and communities, offering free workshops for young people who might not otherwise have access to the arts. One evening, as he was walking through the gallery, making sure everything was running smoothly, a familiar face caught his eye. It was a young man in his early 20s, standing in front of one of Malcolm's early works, staring at it with intensity. The young man looked up, startled, as Malcolm approached. "Hey there," Malcolm said with a warm smile. "What do you think?" The young man hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's amazing. I didn't know someone like me could create art like that." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Someone like you? What do you mean?" The young man shrugged, his voice laced with uncertainty. "I come from a rough neighborhood. I always thought art was for rich people, for people who had the time and money to make something beautiful." Malcolm smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Art is for everyone. It's about expression, about telling your story. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The young man's face lit up. Do you really mean that? Absolutely, Malcolm replied. In fact, we're always looking for new voices here. If you want, we can talk about putting your work up in the next exhibition. No strings attached, just your art. What do you think? Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. I can't believe it. I'd love that. Malcolm clapped him on the back, guiding him to one of the nearby workstations. Well then, let's make it happen. As Malcolm watched the young man walk away, his heart swelled with pride. This was what it was all about, the opportunity to help others find their voice, just as he had found his. In that moment, he realized that the gallery had become more than just a space for art, it had become a symbol of possibility, of change, and of the power of resilience. But even as he built his legacy, Malcolm never lost sight of the lessons he had learned along the way. He remained grounded, always remembering where he had come from. He continued to reach out to the artists whose work was dismissed by the traditional art world, giving them a platform and a voice. And he kept a special place in his heart for the people who had believed in him when no one else did. One afternoon, as he sat in his office, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, there was a knock on the door. It was Sophia, the art collector who had discovered his work at that small community exhibit years ago. Sophia. What brings you by? Malcolm said, standing up to greet her. I was in the neighborhood, she replied, her eyes sparkling. And I wanted to check in and see how things were going. I have to say, I'm beyond impressed. The Phoenix Collective is exactly what the art world needed. Malcolm smiled, sitting back down. Thanks. But it's not just me. It's the artists, the community, the people who've supported us. Sophia nodded. I know. But it's your vision that made it all happen. You've truly changed the game. The conversation shifted, and soon, they were discussing upcoming exhibitions and new partnerships. As they spoke, Malcolm couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had built something lasting, something that would continue to inspire and empower others long after he was gone. That night, as Malcolm walked through the gallery, he took a moment to pause in front of the painting that had started it all, the one that had been ridiculed and dismissed, but had ultimately sparked his rise. The bright colors and bold brushstrokes seemed to pulse with energy, telling a story of defiance and hope. It had been a long and difficult journey, but Malcolm had made it. He had turned rejection into triumph, pain into purpose, and doubt into belief. And now, standing in the gallery that had once rejected him, he knew that his legacy was not just in the walls or the art. It was in every artist who walked through those doors, every visitor who left with a renewed sense of possibility, and every soul who had ever been told they didn't belong. Malcolm's story was no longer just his own. It was a story that belonged to everyone who had ever fought to be seen, heard, and respected. And in that, Malcolm found the ultimate form of success. The gallery had been reborn. And so had he.